everyone, and welcome to Field Notes. My name is Crystal Briggs, and I am a soil scientist in Mount Vernon, Washington, and the Field Notes Regional Representative for the Northwest Soil Survey Region. As a regional representative, I serve on the Field Notes Review Committee. The Review Committee solicits and selects topics for each webinar. We have selected 2 exciting topics for today's live event. But first, let's go over a few housekeeping items. This is a Microsoft Live event, not a Teams meeting, which means you are joining today's webinar in listen-only mode. We encourage you to ask questions at any time using the Q&A panel. The Q&A panel should open by default. However, if for some reason your Q&A panel is not open, simply click on the question mark icon located in the upper right side of your screen. For closed captions, turn on the live caption button located in the lower right corner. Today's session is being recorded. Recorded sessions are available in Teams on the Field Notes channel and the Soil and Plant Science Division's YouTube channel. Again, thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed today's session. With that, I'd like to turn it over to the Field Notes moderator, Dave Hoover, to tell you a little more about today's webinar. Take it away, Dave.
Thanks, Crystal. Hi, everybody. I'm Dave Hoover. I'm the director of the National Soil Survey Center in Lincoln, Nebraska. Welcoming you to webinar number 28. We're going to hit number 30 this year, and I think that's exciting. I've had several people on detail over the last year for a couple months at a time as acting director to build up a little bit more awareness and assistance for what the position all has to offer. This has been one of their favorite activities when I review it with them afterwards. They say, I really liked being the moderator for the Field Notes session. And I agree, this is a great opportunity to hear about what's going on out in the field and to get some other information too at the time, like we're going to hear today. It's unprecedented. I've not seen another part of the agency doing such a thing. I've commented that I've gone online and I've looked for other types of webinar experiences where they come from the field. Usually they'll have upper level management folks talking about something, but this is what I want to hear when I go to this webinar series. And I know the people that have been acting for me have loved it too. Some of them who had not listened before, who have now become converts. So hats off to all the people who have presented, and thanks to all of you that are tuning in for the first time or for the 28th time. As Crystal said, we have a couple of great presentations for you today. We're going to start off with Matt McCauley from Kentucky, who's going to be speaking about an office experience with MIR predictions from carbon to sodium. Matt, turn it over to you.
Okay, the one thing I'm going to go over first is I've got a short video that shows you our setup in Owensboro.
This is our broker Alpha 2 MIR. It doesn't take up a lot of space, as you can see. The MIR is attached to a computer here in the lab. You're probably going to need a dedicated computer for that. Now, before you can have the MIR itself doesn't take up a lot of space, but before you're going to be able to do MIR work, you're going to need an oven. And this oven will bake at around 35 degrees C, 105 degrees. That's where we keep it when we don't want to get it too hot. The small ovens we use for textures and for baking other things. You can't control the temperature like you can on this. We run this for 72 hours at 105 degrees Fahrenheit, and you dry the soils out. The mill we use to prep the samples to scan for the MIR. You have to run 2 mill cups at once, just a small sample, but it's a 15-minute process to to mill 2 cups for 2 scans. So one horizon would basically take 30 minutes of milling. The MIR we can only run 1 sample at a time, 1 horizon at a time. There are production models where you can run way more samples We don't have that. I know North Dakota has that. You know, maybe in the future we get more of this under our belt. That would be the next step to progress to get the one to run multiple samples. On a good day, we can do about 16 horizons. That's really a good day. That's 64 scans. Most days you're probably looking at 48 scans, 12 horizons. So a pedon and a half for us in this part of the world, or to 2 pedons a day, unless you're deep and you have way more horizons. But most of our soils are around 8 to 10 horizons. And then, so we're looking at a pedon and a half, up to 2 pedons a day. We've never gotten to the point where we're doing much more than that. And that's a pretty intense day. But anyway, this is the Alpha 2. Like I said, the Alpha doesn't take up a lot of space, but the other equipment you're going to need, you're going to have to crush samples. So you're going to need a bit of space for that. The other thing, we have the space for storing the samples. We store them by MLRA, and then these are the scintillation vials, and what's inside this vial has been run through the mill, and we just use 4 scoops, 1 scoop at a time. And the scan we put the scanner on here with the soil, and each time we have to set up the process. It takes a few minutes to do that. So that's why we're not getting 100 scans a day. You got to go through all this process every time. So.
Okay, so that was our setup. Our experience so far from carbon to sodium, carbon's been the best models, the best predictions we've been able to make. Sodium is the worst. We got our MIR in late 2019. We went to training in January 2020. After we got back, COVID hit. So we spent a lot of that time that spring building models. We have built over 50 models. Some of the models that performed well, we kept refining, and the ones that weren't performing well, we didn't. We don't spend as much time on because you can't. They don't all work. You can't predict everything with an MIR. So we then sent a lot of data to the National Soil Survey Center because we were doing a lot of field work at the time, and we knew that the MIR data looked really good. We had a great feeling about it, but we weren't sure until we got the data back from Lincoln, how good it was. So the predicted performance of our models run from carbon RPDs of almost around 8 down to 1. The pink class at the bottom is basically poor. We were told an RPD up to 3 was considered poor, but we found most of the models between an RPD of 2 and 3 have been usable. Some more usable than others. And then we have those in the yellow. We have a lot of models that we use in there that are good as well. So but there's the range, and the correlations range from 98 down to 21.2, or 21.9, sorry. The ratio of performance to deviation, I'm not an expert in this, so I don't need to be answering a lot of questions about this because it's not my field, but again, 0 to 2 are pretty much poor. We haven't seen a lot of use, things like bulk density, sodium. We keep those in a poor model folder and never use them. 2 to 3, though, we found usable. Aluminum, calcium chloride, pH itself, we've actually found though that by refining pH to high and low, the models go up to the 3 to 5 range. We can actually get much better models if you know ahead of time pretty close to what your pH is. You can actually refine it and do a better job with the prediction. 3 to 5, we have our new silt models, some of our base saturation, total N, and then our excellent models are for carbon and clay. Again, I'm not an expert on RPD. You may want to research this on your own. I'm just regurgitating what the program told me, basically. So, there's again our model correlation versus RPD. Seems to be around a 12 to 1 or so ratio there, or a little more than that in some cases, 14 to 1. But again, it runs from total carbon all the way down to ESP. Here's an example of a carbon model prediction versus lab results. This is an alluvium along a small creek. There's what the MIR predicted on the left. There's what the lab came back with. And you can see those numbers are usable. They're not always exactly on, but they're in the ballpark. And I've got examples, and I'm not sure why I didn't use them because I didn't want to go through the data as long. But we have some where they're, 0.1 all the way down to profile or less, 0.15. So it's a really good model. The carbon model works great. So for clay and silt, we have predictions that were I want to refine clay and silt because to me that's very important. And we have a lot of loess overlying residuum with depth. And the discontinuity is a big deal because the discontinuity in this part of the world is what causes perched water tables, fragipans, and so forth. The fragipans form at the discontinuity, and the discontinuity between loess is actually where the pans are forming. But so I wanted to build a loess model, and then we have a residual model to look at clay and silt. Not that clay and silt weren't modeling well; they were good, but they weren't good enough for a field soil scientist. So, to build those models, we just excluded anything with more than 15% sand and clay greater than 30% MLRA 120. Now, if I was in another MLRA, say one to the northwest here, I'd have to increase the clay amount because loess gets heavier in that region. It's closer to the source, and it's over a paleosol that's caused it to build up in clay. But in my MLRA, that's not a problem. So this model was built for MLRA 120 loess region. The residual model we use for residuum, and we use for heavy alluvium that's along the Ohio, and we use that for lake beds as well. And it tends to work for all three of those materials really well. Those 5 parent materials, are most of what we have, or 5 types. You got to have, eventually when we get more scans, you get 2,000 scans per material, you might want to just look at those materials exclusively. I'm a big believer in local models and looking at parent materials that are similar as much as possible. But you got to have 2,000 scans, and sometimes you can't get that just in lacustrine materials or alluvium. So, but as time goes on, we'll start to get that. Here you can see my loess clay model versus the lab. The MIR predicted 13.8, the National Soil Survey Center 14.1, 17.8, 16.3, 14.7, 15.9, 12.8, 11.2. You can see that's a really good model as far as I'm concerned. And then you see on the far right my hydrometer. The hydrometer is usually not too far off the lab, except that sometimes I use grab samples for the hydrometer, and with a grab sample you don't always get the entire profile, and I think that's what cost me on that VC there. But one of the problems I had was when I built the Loess clay model, I only took it down to 10%, not including the fact that I'd be sampling on a bluff once in a while. So what happened when we sampled on a bluff, the clay percentage was less than 10 once you got below the BT horizon, but it went ahead and did a really good job of predicting the clay percentage anyway. I mean, it's barely outside the range. That's something I can easily fix, just go back in and lower the range. But you can see it's 7.3% is what the MIR predicted, came back as 8. So 7, 4, and 7, 7, 6, and 9. That's very good predictions for putting a scan on the size of a pencil eraser, you know, and running that. Here's an example of our discontinuities. We have Loess in the upper profile. So I would use the Loess model here. And in the lower profile, I would use the residual model. And you can see the predictions versus the lab. You know, if we use the residual model in the Loess, it would probably say 30 and a lot of 31, 32. A lot of people would be happy with that. I'm not. You know, I want to refine things when I can. And, you know, 28 and 28.5 makes me happier than 28.5 and 32. So maybe I don't understand statistics well enough. But anyway, that's me. Here's an example of a really thick Loess Bluff sample. And as you can see down through the profile, the different Loesses on the right. There's 3 different Loesses in this profile. The third Loess is actually a Paleosol mixed with residuum, but you can see it's actually predicting, doing a fine job where it's outside the model below 10%, picking up that lower clay. So again, that's something that I can go back and adjust in the future. Here's the same profile. It's over 5 meters deep. It was in the area where we had piping going on. And a lot of our piping's in coarse silty areas with old clay tile, but not always old clay tile, but most of the time. Here, the significant thing was we actually had a Farmdale surface, a 2A at 3.9 meters, and the increase in carbon with the buried A horizon was nice to see. So that was, the MIR was picking that up, which was great. And the southern edge of our MRA 120, the Loess is thinned down. You know, we got 5 to 10 meters of Loess on the uplands near the Ohio, and we're down to about a half a meter or less on a stable landform in the uplands. The carbonates in the Loess were probably never great enough down that far from the river or thick enough to recharge the residuum below to an Alfisol. Most of our Loess soils with underlying residuum have been recharged to Alfisols or our Alfisols. Where the Loess starts to get below a half meter, there probably isn't enough to do this. So we were wondering, can MIR predict base sat? This is a big thing for us. This is probably the biggest thing for us for soil survey purposes. And when we went to training, we were told probably not. But, you know, most of that work was done at that time for us anyway in the Midwest and the Great Plains, and nobody had dealt with this problem. So but this is what we found. So again, the site we're looking at the edge of the MRA. It's thin Loess over residuum. Part of the field is residuum over limestone. The remainder of the field is residuum from shale. We assumed the material over limestone was an Alfisol. We were unsure of the portion of the field overlying shale. We thought it would be probably an Ultisol, but we weren't sure. It's right on the point of, you know, being around 30. So these two areas about 100 meters apart on the ground, a couple hundred to 300 feet. They're within a meter or two in elevation of one another. Of course, they're mapped completely different series, completely different patinas, but one's a shale sandstone residual patina with a thin smear of Loess. The other one is a limestone. And so when we got the data back, we were wondering, could we predict the base out of these? The area with shale, the MIR predicted to be 23.25%. The National Soil Survey Center came back with 24. That's great. That's outstanding. The limestone, it predicted 71, and the lab came back 79. Now, these are two, these are in the same field, the same 40, 50 acre field. So, and they're right beside each other in elevation. So, just looking out over the landform, you wouldn't expect that much difference, but the underlying geology leads you to why you have this. So the great thing is we looked at this in a lot of other areas, and it seems like MIR is, and we've got data, is doing a great job at predicting base set. We had hatch kits in the lab. I'm 57. They were from when I was in 3rd grade, so we weren't going to use those. They were from 1974. So yeah, they were probably worn out. So this is a way better technique than that. But the fact that we can predict base saturation is huge to me. It's because I have a lot of areas in the very southeast. Now, 90% of my area is going to be alfisols, but in that last 10% of the area where the Loess begins to thin, we have alfisols and ultisols. And now with the MIR, we can go in, and it looks like from a lot of the other data we have, I'm not just basing this on one pedon. So we have a lot of other data that suggests that this is working very well. The base sat models that's a huge thing for us. And I think the RPD is only in the 3s for those. So, but it seems better than that to me. The MIR can be great for analyzing certain soil properties. We got about 20 good models we use on every site we run through the local lab. You can't predict everything. You need to determine what predictions are going to work well in your area. I mean, I know there's a lot of things that work in your all's areas out there that I don't have, but I don't need to do calcium carbonate equivalent when the pH is 5.1. So the acid soils in this part of the world, I don't need that. I don't have to measure gypsum, calcium, the carbonate clay and so on. It's not, but in the Midwest and the Great Plains, other places you need to do that. I'm a big proponent of looking at properties by parent material. Not all properties, like carbon, to me, it doesn't need that. A lot of other properties don't need that. But when you get into textures where you get a wide range, because if you've got materials from sandstone that are 65, 70% sand versus Loess, which is 5% sand, I don't want to analyze those together. I'm going to analyze those separately. The same thing with shales that are 80% clay or limestone residuum that's 60% clay. I'd rather look at the Loess as its own unit, and I want to look at the residuums as their own units. And we refine models also by high clay, low clay, because we've textured things with our hands before, and we know fairly close to what we're going to be getting. And we run it through the lab with the model and use the right model. We also know the parent materials very well. 35 years experience for me, and then other people here with more than 20 years. And so knowing the parent materials, knowing what materials you're in, knowing the geology, those things are going to help you when you're doing MIR work. I'm not a big proponent of universal models or large scale models. There may be some properties that model fine that way, but when you're trying to refine things down to the point that we are, a local model built by a knowledgeable person on the staff should be more usable than a model built by someone 1,000 miles away who's never stepped foot in the region. So no offense to anyone, I'm just saying. So if, you know, if you're thinking of getting an MIR and you're going to be lazy and let other people build your models for you, I greatly suggest you not do that. You need to be involved. You need input. And if we're going to refine things and get things to where we want them as field people, they're going to be needing our input. And I just think that the local person's going to have to play a huge role in that. So with that said, that's all I have with our experience.
Thanks, Matt.
Well,
Great perspective on it. There are not any questions right now. We'll give folks a quick minute here to type in questions that they have been thinking about. In the meantime, I did have a question about your exchangeable sodium comments. It really wasn't working well for you. Was that only at the lower ends of ESP, or was it at the higher ends too, or did it just seem to follow that not a good predictive model all over?
yeah, that we have so much that's on the lower end that we had to model. So if I were in, you know, like one region in Southern Illinois or in California where there was a lot of ESP data, I might do a better job, but still sodium's a small part of the exchange complex usually. But we have some soils that are, you know, have ESPs of 40, 50. And
Yikes.
they did not fly much off the line of something that was 4 or 5. It just didn't work very well. You know, small things are not going to drive, you know, where calcium usually is large. And so we do pretty well with calcium. Aluminum, we do really well with. Magnesium, a little less. Potassium, we can't do at all. But sodium, since it's so absent so much of the time, but then it's in great, you know, maybe if we had enough of the high sodium, 2,000 scans of that, I could have made it work. I didn't have that. So that's one of my limitations there. I'm not sure though, if I did, from looking at remembering the graphs, that it would work all that well.
Okay, thank you. Well, we've got shy people out there not typing in questions. If questions do come in though, we'll have you answer those and we'll post those along with the presentation.
Okay.
So I thank you again for presenting, and we'll go to our next presentation, which is Meredith Albers from Vermont, and she's going to talk about resume writing tips. Meredith, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dave. We'll get my presentation shared. If you could let me know if that's showing all right.
Looks great.
Perfect. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. This presentation on resume writing tips came from both Soil and Plant Science Division employees and from the field and reviewing and selecting official sides of the application process. So both people applying and those doing the reviewing. There is an absolute wealth of information out there on creating resumes. We encourage you to review the references we'll provide in this presentation and other resources you find. But no, there is no one perfect method for creating a resume or applying to a federal job. We're just going to cover some of the top tips in this presentation today. So to create this presentation, we reached out to leadership, hiring managers, and reviewers for their tips and tricks for creating a federal resume. And it turns out there's a lot of other critical items in USDA jobs in the hiring process that are preventing some really well qualified applicants from making the panel before a resume can even be reviewed. So we're going to go over some of those items first, your documentation and the questionnaire in USDA jobs, and then we'll finish out with some of those basics about creating a federal resume. We're going to discuss the purpose of those resumes, some of the differences between non-federal resumes and federal resumes, key components, and then some top do's and don'ts. So first up, that official basic documentation required for just about any federal job. In USA Jobs, you're going to need to upload your SF50, your performance appraisal, and your transcripts. Each of these items is providing different evidence to the HR contact, the human resources manager, the hiring manager, and the reviewing panel. Without any one of these documents, your application may be rejected outright. We've included links to the official locations to obtain the government forms and the SF50 and the performance appraisal, and these are going to be available in this presentation and in the additional document with the Q&A from the presentation. So first up is the standard form 50 or SF50, also known as the Notification of Personnel Action. You will have many SF50s from all kinds of different actions regarding your career with the federal government. For example, if you change locations, positions, receive an award, go on a detail, or receive a temporary promotion, you may get an SF50 for every single one of those. Each of those actions are going to generate a different SF50 for your record and may have different boxes filled out on the form. Your SF50 in USA Jobs is needed to determine your eligibility to apply for a position. So you may need to submit more than one. You can typically combine multiple SF50s into one PDF. The one that you're going to need to submit is usually from your most recent permanent grade or step increase. These should have all the correct boxes filled out that are listed on this slide. Other SF50s might be missing some of that critical information, for example, an SF50 for just a spot award. A great practice is to save your SF50s into USA Jobs whenever you receive a new one that contains the required documentation. That way, you're always ready to apply for a job that gets posted. Without the correct SF50, your application is going to be rejected. And here is a screenshot of one of those SF50 forms. Completely blank, but we've circled in blue the boxes that need to be filled out. And as you start looking at some of the SF50s in your files, you're going to notice that there's different boxes that are filled out for each one. Okay, the second piece of documentation you need is your latest performance appraisal. This is not your current year performance plan, any quarterly conversations or mid-year reviews. This needs to be something that was completed from the previous fiscal year that shows a rating of fully successful and is signed by all the required individuals. There's even a job aid on how to do this in the EMPA website, which we got a link to for this slide. If you don't have your current performance appraisal, your application is going to be rejected. So another good practice, upload your performance appraisal every time you get your completed one from each year in USA Jobs, so it is ready to go. If the position you're applying for has an educational requirement, which most of the Soil and Plant Science Division technical positions do, you're going to be required to upload a copy of your academic transcripts. It's okay for these to be unofficial copies. However, you must make sure that they show the completion of any courses or degrees required to meet the qualifications for the position. You need to be prepared to provide an official transcript if requested. Additionally, it's always a good idea to include some information about the specific course and degree program to help an HR official or other reviewer see that they meet the specific needs of the position. This could be information like course descriptions, syllabi, or sections of an academic catalog from the institution. This is going to be required for every position you apply for your whole career with the federal government, more likely than not. If you upload these documents into USA Jobs now, you'll be prepared for any future positions where you might need this information. Remember, if the position has an educational qualification and you do not upload your transcript, your application is going to be rejected. Another item in USA Jobs, besides your official documentation, is the assessment questionnaire. You can view the assessment questionnaire from any position on USA Jobs without ever applying. You can go right now, scroll through the posting information and find a link to that assessment questionnaire. It's a great idea to take a look at this whenever a job is advertised you think you might be interested in the future, so you can prepare your responses when a job you want to apply is advertised. Reviewing jobs before you ever hit that point of wanting to apply to them can also help you identify what areas you may need to work on to be the most qualified applicant for a similar position in the future. There are typically 3 different types of positions or sections in the assessment questionnaires: eligibilities, preferences, and then a full-on assessment. The first section determines if you're eligible for the position. These questions can be very confusing to some employees. If you're not sure how to respond, a good practice with these is just to answer yes. Answering no to any of these eligibility type questions will often result in your application being rejected. The next section is asking if you have any preferences. Sometimes these sections will occur if a position has multiple locations offered, or if there's multiple grades, they might be filling it. It's a great idea to make sure you consider these questions very carefully. Are you really willing to pass up on a job because you aren't willing to accept a lower grade or a less desirable position? On the other hand, if you're definitely not going to take that greater position location, don't select that you're willing to go there. Kind of wastes everybody's time. The final section is all about your qualifications for the position. This is the bulk of the assessment questions. Do you meet the qualifications? And this one as well may be broken up into 3 different types of questions. You may see questions that are very specific to the official personnel management job series qualification requirements. If you get questions like these, it can ask if you want to prove or qualify based on education alone or education and a combination of experience. That will, if you're qualifying with a combination of education and experience, it requires experience outside of the federal government. If you meet based on education alone, always select education because it's easier to prove. You have a degree, it's done. The next set of questions may be time and grade questions. This may also give you the option of qualifying based on experience, known as time and grade or education. For this question, time and grade is established with your SF50 and can be easier to prove than education, which requires that transcript review and interpretation. If you meet the requirements for time and grade, be sure and select that answer. Sometimes you may have the option to select both time and grade and education. Make sure it's obvious that you meet both before selecting both. The rest of the questionnaire questions will be about specific tasks related to the position. This portion has the bulk of your rating built into it. Here is where you're going to indicate your level of experience with the specific tasks. You are going to need to rate high on this portion to be deemed among the most qualified and passed on to the hiring official. So you want to make sure that you're giving yourself the highest rating that you actually qualify for. Some important tips regarding these skill-based questions in the assessment questionnaire. Government employees tend to underrate themselves. Make sure you're considering the questions carefully and give yourself the benefit of the doubt. If you're not sure, go ahead and round up in your answer. Think about you on your very best day. That was a great tip we got when we were preparing this presentation. Don't overthink the questions or fall victim to imposter syndrome. If you're really struggling with how to answer assessment questions for specific tasks, ask some supervisors or hiring managers or mentors for advice. This is yet another great reason to start reviewing jobs now so you can prepare well in advance of one being advertised. Now we're going to move on to federal resumes. Your federal resume should be the single comprehensive document that tells the hiring manager who you are and why you're the best fit for the position. It should have your education and experience and be tailored specifically to the position you're applying for. It must include evidence that you have the ability to fulfill the duties of the position as described in USA Jobs, and it should also support your questions or your answers to the assessment questionnaire. Federal resumes usually differ from other resumes in that they typically require a lot more detail. They're also often saved in your official personnel file and are a part of your permanent employment record. The length is not critical like private industry, which is typically 1 to 2 pages max. You want to make sure you're using whatever length you need to provide the detail to support that you have the skills for the position. But you don't want to make it excessively long just because you can. Remember, your reviewer has limited time. Make it easy on them to choose you by focusing on what is most important for the position. You want them to quickly see that you are the most qualified. Resume reviewers, we were asking about preferences for preparing this presentation, would love to see resumes that are no longer than 3 to 5 pages. Some requested even less. A good rule of thumb is to prioritize the most impressive information on the first page of your resume, with progressively less impressive information on subsequent pages. If something isn't important to the position you're applying for, just leave it off entirely. So key components of a federal resume are similar to a private resume. Make sure your name and contact information is given. Even consider including multiple forms of email and/or phone numbers in case you're away from the office or traveling abroad and you can't have access to everything. You want to make sure they can contact you for an interview at any time. The actual format and structure can vary, but you need to make sure you document the skills and supporting evidence that you are specifically qualified for the new position. You also need to provide specific information about your previous positions. Hours per week is important, even if the job isn't a federal job or is. If it's less than full time, it's really critical. Be sure to indicate a position is a federal job. This is something I learned in preparing for this presentation. People aren't indicating their positions are federal jobs on their resume, and some HR contacts are booting them from the panel because they don't meet the qualifications. Make sure you're focusing on the tasks and accomplishments in each job that are most important to the new position. Since education is often a qualifying factor, be sure to include it in your resume. It's important to have the degree and institution listed, even possibly the date it was obtained. You can include your GPA, but it isn't necessary. If your GPA is impressive, put it in there. Especially if you're a student without a permanent federal job in the past, a high GPA may help with your starting grade. Be sure to include highly relevant coursework that qualifies you for the OPM job series you're applying for. The requirements are going to be listed in USA Jobs, but you can check the OPM website long before a vacancy is posted. Remember, make it easy for the reviewer to see how you qualify for the job. Don't make the reviewer have to search through your transcript or resume for important information. Your resume is your first impression. Make it a good one. So now on to those tips and tricks from leadership and reviewers. Be sure to include the same language and keywords from the vacancy announcement and questionnaire when you're detailing your experience in your resume. Your resume may be reviewed by people who don't have a lot of background about the position or your experience. Communicate in clear and concise ways that most people can understand and recognize that you fit the job that's being advertised. Your detailed experience should highlight the results or accomplishments of your efforts. You don't want a resume that's simply a list of tasks. If it reads like a position description, your resume could apply to anyone. It does not highlight how you specifically were successful in your role. Think about what impact your tasks had on fulfilling the project, division, or agency mission in your positions when you're fleshing out your resume. Make sure you have multiple people review your resume. You can ask different folks to focus on different things, maybe some on content, some on spelling or grammar. You want your resume to look professional. Having fresh eyes review it and be direct with you on changes needed is really helpful. To rely on just autocorrect tools or thinking the first draft is the best draft is just not putting your best foot forward. This is another great reason to prepare well in advance of a vacancy being posted so you can have multiple people review your resume and provide feedback. Remember, Your resume is that first impression someone in the hiring process will have of you. You want it to stand out, and its content and format is an excellent example. It should be easy to find the impressive information about your experience. If someone has to hunt for the impressive information or evidence that you qualify for the job, your resume needs more work. Reviewers just don't have a lot of time to hunt through a poorly built resume. Consider building a resume in USA Jobs Builder and how that product looks compared to a custom resume uploaded as a PDF. Some positions with other agencies may only allow the resume builder. If you have an option, think about what most reviewers will like better. That USA Jobs Builder is going to make sure you check all of the boxes for the content that's required, but when it's printed out, it can be really difficult for a reviewer to scroll through and find that highlighted information that really makes you the exemplary candidate. You can view and save your USA Jobs profile at any time. Even the links for old advertisements can still work long after they've closed. So make sure you're preparing ahead of time. Pay attention to those closing date and times in vacancies as they come out. You don't want to wait until the last minute to create and submit your application. By taking a look at those jobs as they get advertised in USA Jobs, saving them, researching them, preparing long before something is ever going to be advertised, you're going to be in a much better position to get all of your materials submitted well ahead of the closing date and time, and you won't be caught in that last minute crunch to create and submit your application. Okay, I've got a list of resumes here. I'll get copied into the Q&A for the chat, and we will go ahead and include any additional questions we have. There were questions we solicited ahead of time for creating this presentation. Some of those answers we were able to incorporate, and some of them we have in a Word document that's been uploaded to Box. So we'll get that information, and I'm happy to take any questions, as I'm sure anyone else on the panel might be willing to answer.
Thank you, Meredith. Not seeing any questions right now. We'll give folks, as we have before, a few minutes to quickly type in their queries. How about assistance during resume writing? Is there a good online 1-800 I need help sort of way to get assistance, or to have somebody review, or what would you recommend there?
I would recommend reaching out to your mentors and supervisors, and just get advice from other people that you work with, that you know have been interviewing for positions, reviewing applications.
Okay, and thank you for adding the Box account down there. A good set of references for everybody to take a look at. Well, I'll check one last time, and I see you're still adding some content. Are you adding more content, Meredith? Or
These
many
are,
more here?
No, probably not. I think
Okay.
I've got the U.S. Office of Personnel Management events to add. These were just some things that we came upon when looking for resources. OPM actually has events that they will publicize through Eventbrite. So that's the last one. The YouTube link is to UPM or OPM YouTube video on tips for communicating your qualifications. There's other ones on getting help with writing resumes and what to include. There's just a really big wealth of resources out there.
Great. I'll give about 1 more minute for any questions to come in. While we're waiting, I will remind people that our next webinar is going to be October 10th. And I think we're going to bring our session to the close for today. Thanks again to all the presenters for sharing their information and their knowledge with us. Thanks to the audience for sitting in, and let's all get together again in about a month. Take care, folks.